All right, 5 o'clock, we'll call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. We will start with roll call, so why don't you introduce yourself and the district or area you represent. Start over there.
I'm Ryan Shirley, District 13.
Carrie Rice, District 5.
Jerry Van Someren, District 18.
Scott Cowner, District 11.
Sean Anderson, District 2.
Jason Cheezitt, Community Development Director.
Ken Witt, County Administrator.
Julie Peterson, Community Development Department.
All right, and we'll start with, we're going to the minutes. Does anyone have any comments or changes on the minutes? Seeing no changes, those will stand as approved. Now move to public comment. Does anyone have any public comment for anything on or off the agenda that isn't a public hearing? Okay, no public comment. We'll move into public hearings. We'll start with number 1, the rezoning of Teray Farms, Inc. in the town of Aaron Prairie. John?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Our first public hearing tonight is a rezoning application by Teray Farms Incorporated, represented by Dennis Mitchell. This rezone is in the town of Aaron Prairie. The request is to rezone two-thirds of an acre from Ag 1 to R1 residential. The purpose of the rezone is an abutting property owner just to the north of Teray Farms unknowingly built their septic system for their home on the parcel owned by Teray Farms. The property at 1552 200th Street is zoned R1 with a lot size of approximately 12 acres. We'll forward to a map here in just a moment. The intent is to rezone a triangular shaped parcel of two-thirds of an acre that contains the septic system from Ag 1 to R1 and attach it to the residential parcel. Next, we'll just forward to some aerial photos. You'll see that the parcel is right off of 220th Street in the heart of agriculture territory in the town of Aaron Prairie. Zooming in on the aerial photo, the blue parcel is 12 acres in size. That contains a single-family home. The septic system they built is in the area of the red triangle just to the east of these woods. So the intent is for the parcel in blue to purchase that two-thirds of an acre and rezone it to R1 to be consistent with their existing zoning. And the proposed survey map shows it much better. Again, the red triangle is owned by Teray Farms. They will be selling it to the property owners up here. And then they would be creating a certified survey map to merge the two parcels. The rezone is to make the one combined parcel a singular zoning district. Some general features of the property, the zoning, you'll see abutting zoning districts. The blue and the green are the agricultural districts. The yellow is the R1 residential district, density of 1 unit per 10 acres. That's where the home is on the 12-acre parcel. Official zoning maps, when they are changed, such as the rezoning requests, have to be compared to the comprehensive plan according to state statute. The comprehensive plan is a visionary document created by the town that portrays future land use patterns. And in the town of Aaron Prairie, you'll see that the parcel is guided for future residential and agriculture. You'll see by the black circle, it's included in residential and agriculture in the key. The comp plan language summary from Aaron Prairie states that agriculture areas are obviously used for agriculture or related purposes. They also include lands that are wooded, contain wetlands, and have other topographic restrictions. Residential, of course, can be used for single-family homes, which is the case here. In the brief analysis, we believe from staff perspective that the rezoning request is consistent with the comp plan. This rezoning would not result in adding any new dwelling eligibilities or the loss of any prime farmland. Rather, it aims to rectify the error regarding the placement of the septic system, which crossed the property boundary line. Much like the town plan, the county comprehensive plan mirrors the town plan, the future land use plan. See in the red square that this area is guided for future agriculture and mixed rural agriculture, which allows all farming uses and residential density at 1 unit per 10 acres. Lands in this category can be zoned Ag 1, Ag 2, or R1. So we believe the request is also consistent with the county plan. Looking quickly at natural features, there will be no impacts to scenic and rec areas, prairie remnant sites, and other features. You'll see on the map number 3 that there are some limiting soils for private treatment systems, but when this one was built, it was built on the very far east side that you'll see in the next photo. This is a steep slope map. You can see the outline of the mound system that's elevated above the ground level here, outlined in brown. Most of the parcel to the north and areas adjacent are prime farmland, prime productive farmland. Governmental agency review. As we do with all rezonings, the town is asked to provide a recommendation, and the town did recommend approval at their March 18th town board meeting. Since these were included in the packet a week or so ahead of time, I'm not going to go through every applicable statute and criteria, other than to say that after review, staff believes that this request is consistent with both the town and county comprehensive plans, the county natural resource management plan, and the St. Croix County zoning ordinance. Other criteria we request is that the town does not disapprove the request. In this case, they did approve it. The rezoning is consistent with surrounding districts, and that the rezoning and proposed use is consistent with the districts and does not result in spot zoning. In summary, staff recommends approval of the request based on items 1 through 4 on the overhead, which I just covered. As of 4:30 this afternoon, we have not received any public comment from the notices that were sent to abutting owners or the notice published in the official newspaper. That concludes the staff overview. Any questions?
Yes, Scott.
Just have one question. Has staff or have you verified that the new parcel being created meets all the setbacks for the absorption field from property lines and that?
So when I'm not sure the date of when the placement was approved, but it did meet the setbacks at the time the initial system was installed. And it's not being modified.
So with this, once this triangle's in place and purchased, then the setbacks to the lines and everything would meet our current ordinances.
Supervisor Coner, if I may, the setback for a drain field from the lot line is 5 feet, and so it would meet that setback. Yep.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to, from the public, like to comment either for or against this zoning change? Any public comment on this zoning change? No, then we will close this public hearing. Moving on to business item 1, then, would anyone like to make a motion concerning this zoning change?
I'd make a motion to approve the request for changing zoning or amending the comprehensive zoning ordinance in section 14, township 30 north, range 17 west, in the town of Aaron Prairie for rezoning 0.64 acres from Ag 1 agricultural zoning to R1 residential zoning.
Second.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, so we have a first and a second on approving the rezoning. Do we have any discussion? No discussion. We'll do this with the voice vote. All those in favor of these zonings signify by saying
Aye.
Aye.
any opposed? No, carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, and we'll now go to public hearing number 2 for rezoning in the town of Aaron Prairie.
Public hearing number 2, again, is a rezoning application in the town of Aaron Prairie. The applicant is Elizabeth Fall. The site address is 1612 County Road T. The request before the committee tonight is to rezone the parcel of 40 acres from Ag 1 to Ag 2. Currently, there is one dwelling unit on the 40 acres, which maxes out the available dwelling eligibilities. The property owner would like to rezone to Ag 2. The Ag 2 district allows 2 dwelling units per 40 acres. The application is being submitted in accordance with section 15.545 of the county code. We'll proceed to some aerial photos. Location at the point of the arrow, the red dot, adjacent to County Road T. You'll see north of there is County Road K and Highway 64 running east-west. Aerial photo, the 40 acres is outlined in blue, adjacent to County T. You see the existing farmstead, the 1 unit on the 40 acres with access off of County Road T. You'll see that the area is primarily zoned agriculture. The town of Aaron Prairie is a farmland preservation plan township, so much of their township is either zoned Ag 1 or Ag 2. Like the other application, we compared the comprehensive plans to the request. Specifically, we take a look at the future land use plan of the town of Aaron Prairie's comprehensive plan. As you see here, that the town of Aaron Prairie comp plan designates this area as agricultural and natural area. Some of the corresponding languages and the goals from the town plan states that they want to preserve the productive farmlands in the town for long-term farm use and to maintain agriculture as a major economic activity and way of life. And as I just mentioned, to that end, the town of Aaron Prairie participates in the Wisconsin Working Lands Program created by DATCAP. The goal of the program is to achieve preservation of areas of significant farmland for agricultural uses. The county, in conjunction with DATCAP, created 2 ag districts, the Ag 1 and Ag 2 district, that are certified zoning districts, which means that the state and the county acknowledges them as legitimate ag districts for zoning purposes. As I mentioned earlier, Ag 1 is 1 unit per 40 acres for residential development density. The Ag 2 allows that extra unit of get 2 units per 40 acres. So from that end, the request is consistent with the town comp plan. Likewise, the county comp plan matches the town plan. The future land use map of the county designates this as agriculture. It supports the 1 unit per 20 acres or the 1 unit per 40 acres, which corresponds to the Ag 1 or Ag 2 districts. Therefore, we believe it is consistent with the county future land use plan and the comprehensive plan. Looking at some natural resource features, a portion of the property is within an environmental corridor, and that corresponds to a shoreland overlay district on a nearby property for navigable water. You'll see that that area is marked in red in the upper corner, and you have the 1,000-foot buffer around that. And basically that 1,000-foot buffer just represents some development standards that the owner would have to comply with in terms of impervious surface area and land disturbance and buffer vegetation requirements. But I believe that second lot's going to be created outside of that zone. No significant slopes exist on the site. Soil types indicate productive farmland on portions of the property. Governmental agency review, the town recommended approval at their April 15th, 2024 town board meeting. Because the request abuts County Road T, we had the St. Croix Highway Department review the request. The department did not have any concerns with the rezoning. However, they did state when the second lot is created, the owner will need to use the existing access and convert the permit to a shared access. So the 2 units would share the 1 access. Again, we pulled some applicable policies out of the town comp plan, continue to preserve farmland, allow development that does not fragment farming land, and support managed growth, which is consistent with the DATCAP approved certified zoning districts. Like the other applications, staff believes that this request is consistent with applicable comprehensive plans, the county natural resource plan, and the county zoning ordinance. The town has approved this request, and the rezoning would not result in any spot zoning. Based on that, staff would recommend approval of the request based on findings 1 through 4, which are shown up above. As of 4:30 today, we have not received any public comment from the individual notices sent out or from the notice published in the official paper. That concludes the overview.
All right, do we have any questions from the committee? Would anyone from the public like to comment either in favor or against this rezoning? No comment from the public. I'll close the public hearing. We'll move now to business item number 2 to amend the zoning ordinance per public hearing number 2. Jerry?
Recommend that we amend the comprehensive zoning ordinance, section 9, township 30N, range 17 west, town of Erie Prairie, rezoning the 40 acres from Ag 1 agricultural to Ag 2 agricultural.
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Yes, Ryan.
Just have a quick question. We always talk about the Ag 1, Ag 2. If you zoomed your overview map out, do we have any Ag 2 in that area?
We didn't zoom out far enough, but I do know in the town of Erin Prairie, there are scattered areas of Ag 2.
Okay.
We don't consider that spot zoning if it's interspersed with Ag 1 and Ag 2, because again, they're both consistent with the state DATCAP certified zoning districts. This one, that would be R1 residential, which is primarily agriculture, but that one's a little bit less, allows a little bit more density at 1 unit per 10 acres of density. Yep.
Yes, Scott.
Is any of that, is this in any count with a ag enterprise area where it would impact the total number of acres that would be necessary for continuing a program?
This is not part of the AEA or agricultural enterprise area. Yep.
Any other discussion? All right, no other discussion. We'll put this to a vote. All those signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll move on to public hearing number 3, rezoning for Crampert in the town of Hammond.
So this next rezoning request was actually initiated by the Community Development Department. The site address is 1629 US Highway 12 in the town of Hammond. Property owner is Craig Crampert. The total area of the parcel in discussion tonight is 6.47 acres. And going back to the 1980s and 1990s, this parcel did have 2 separate zoning district designations. And we'll get to the map in just a minute, but to explain what happened, between the years 2017 and 2019, the county undertook a comprehensive zoning revision. And so basically it was a rewrite of the entire zoning ordinance and also a relook at the county zoning maps. And as part of this process, in conjunction with the towns, we reviewed about 25,000 different parcels covering the entire county, except for those in cities and villages. And what ended up happening is that an error occurred where the two zoning districts on the property were mistakenly swapped and incorrectly applied to the structures. I think that can be, well, we'll show the aerial photo here in just a minute, but the location is just northwest of the village of Hammond, off of County Road 12, at the tip of that blue arrow. Again, it's 6.46 acres. Here's a little bit of a blow up of the 6.46 acres. So the red dot to the north represents the home, the residential structure. And then in an accessory building is the business, which is an auto repair facility. So when the maps were finalized in 2019, we ended up with the map on the left, which incorrectly showed the commercial district covering the residential structure and the R2 residential zoning covering the accessory building that contained the business. And so on the right is the proposed zoning map, which correctly shows the commercial district over the accessory building, and the R2 district would cover the single family home and the other accessory structure. And this becomes an issue because if it's not corrected, if the owner would want to make improvements or expansions to the home, they couldn't, because single family homes are not permitted uses in the commercial district. You can't expand a non-conforming use. And so this was brought to our attention through our zoning staff. They had a question on the property and they brought this to our attention. We immediately contacted the owner, the owner's agent, as well as the town of Hammond to let them know what was going on. So as part of this process, again, because we're making a correction, it's still a change to the zoning map. We still have to go through the notification procedures like we would for any rezoning. We also have to check the comprehensive plans to make sure, according to statute, that we are consistent with the comp plan. And you can see the future land use map from the town of Hammond has for some time indicated a dual use on this property. This is from their comprehensive plan. The red shows the commercial designation to the rear of the property, and then right adjacent to 12, you'll see that little lip along Highway 12, that's for residential. And likewise, the county plan pretty much mirrors the town plan. Again, our analysis, oops, sorry about that. Our analysis of this, I think I went too far up. Sorry about that. But basically, our analysis of this is because it is a corrective action. We would recommend approval. It is consistent with the comprehensive plans. We are not really going to go through and walk through all the natural resource maps because really nothing's changing on the property. We're just reassigning the correct zoning districts. Nonetheless, we still had the town of Hammond review it. We did get an email communicated through their town board chairman on April 16th that they were supportive of the correction rezoning and did not have any concerns with that. And as stated before, we believe it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. You see the findings 1 through 4. We did provide notice to abutting property owners and posted the notice in the official newspaper. And as of this afternoon, we have not had any public comment on this request. That concludes the overview.
Do we have any questions on this rezoning? Yep, Scott.
Looking back at the map on this one, the only, I guess the question I have, I realize that this is just for rezoning purposes at this point, but under the new, as you have it, if you look at how the old one was, the R2 did have access back to, I think it's, you'd mentioned, I think it was County Road, I think that's US 12.
Yes.
And I was just wondering on that, under the new one, we aren't showing any type of access. Now, if they were to plat this in the future then, are you looking that they would do a joint driveway or something? Or, because with the commercial, is there additional egress requirements for as far as widths or anything for getting in for commercial? And
Since-
would that be, is it, or is this just a non-issue? I'm sorry, I just
Yep.
want to be thorough.
Yep. Since this process is not parallel to any land division process, the owner doesn't have any intent at this time to subdivide. So the rezoning is the rezoning, it's a standalone. So at this point, we're not really dealing with access or easements because there is no intent to subdivide the property.
I guess my one question is, since this was kind of our error, I'm hoping we just kind of did this for free.
We did.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions from the committee? Would anyone from the public like to comment on this rezoning? No. All right. I will close the public hearing. We'll now move on to business item number 3 concerning the rezoning we just discussed. Jerry?
I'm just going to make a motion.
Sure. Go ahead.
I make a motion that we correct this mistake that we made, amending the comprehensive zoning ordinance, section 20, township 29 north, range 17 west of town of Hammond. Just correcting it so it's up to date the way it should be.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right. We'll do this again via voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying
I,
aye. Any opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now
Thank
move on
you.
We'll now move on to public hearing number 4, the Chapter 12 Sanitary and Chapter 13 Land Division Ordinance Amendments.
Perfect. Look at that. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Chapter 12 is the county sanitary ordinance. This ordinance applies to all properties in St. Croix County that are on their private wastewater treatment system. So anything that would be a municipal wastewater system, and that would not fall underneath this ordinance. The main purpose of amending this ordinance, and that was to correct some incorrect administrative code citations that reference the Department of Commerce that hasn't been around for over 10 years. It also provides some clarity for how staff are currently administering our sanitary program. And there's only really one main significant policy change, which I'll zoom into, and that after this. The county did provide these changes to the Wisconsin Towns Association a few weeks ago. We had no bad feedback on any of the proposed amendments. And Heather with Corporation Counsel has reviewed the ordinance as well for compliance with statute and administrative code. And she has given it her blessing as well. And we did publish a Class 2 notice prior to this public hearing tonight. And with that, I'm going to zoom into the policy change. There was a petition that was filed with the county clerk in accordance with the procedures in Wisconsin Statute 5969 5E. And so historically, St. Croix County has prohibited holding tanks in any situation except for a replacement system. And one of the things that we've seen is that our aerobic treatment unit systems and that, so the ATUs, they have like a fast unit bubbler to break down high strength waste, are probably not treating our wastewater like they said they were. And so there's some issues there. So we wanted to propose the option of having high-strength waste be collected in a holding tank, because then that waste will be taken to a municipal plant to be treated appropriately. This might be something that could be changed back down the road, but this is a relatively new occurrence at the state level, that they came out and they found out that really they needed a UV and a chlorine treatment along with the aerobic treatment unit in order to adequately serve this high-strength waste. High-strength waste is basically commercial kitchen type of waste, bars, restaurants, that kind of stuff. Usually involves grease and just a lot of BODs. So that was a thought of ours. Also, the popularity of a man cave or a she shed is becoming very popular out there. So the idea of having a sanitary facility and that to serve that accessory dwelling might be a nice option, especially being a holding tank if it's over on the east side of the county, because the soils are very poor, and so a lot of people won't put in the bathroom in their building. They'll go around the corner, and that because it's a $15,000 mound system in order to do so. That's another one. And then the last one, or the last place where a holding tank could potentially be used if this ordinance is adopted, would be to collect gray water from people that don't have a full sewer system. So the Amish, for example, we met with them about a month ago, and they use privies or outhouses for their black waste, but yet they would still like to have the potential for a hand wash sink or some kind of clothes washing sink to be able to collect the wastewater, which the way that we have it here would allow for that to be collected in a holding tank and not into a mound or an at-grade sewer system. The reason being for that is if they don't have electricity, it's hard to get the effluent pumped from the tank up into the mound. And so it was just an option that might be a win-win for the county, because right now, a lot of that is running on the ground surface. And so the state, through the building code, has an exemption or a waiver process for people that are part of a religious sect, like the Amish. And that exempts them from electrical, plumbing, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors in the building. But it does not exempt them from the sewer system components outside of the building to collect the waste. So this is one of the things in that we feel might be a win-win that might help some of our Amish community be able to comply with the regulations. And so part of a sanitary ordinance like this is that we had to provide 30 days notice to the Department of Safety and Professional Services, which is the department at the state that's in charge of this, and they came back and there was no required changes for this ordinance. So if the committee felt comfortable with this ordinance, you would take and make a motion to recommend approval to the full county board, because it still does require county board approval since it is an ordinance. And with that, I'm more than happy to open up any questions or concerns.
Any questions on chapter 12? Jerry?
Just a comment. I think this is a good idea. In fact, I would like to see us consider expanding this. And for what you said, the reason you said, Jason, because I know a lot of people who have put mound systems in over the past several years, and they work somewhat, but not very well. If we treat it this way, all of the water, all of the waste goes into a cast and is all pumped from there and run through a municipal sewer system. We know that it's taken care of properly. We know that there's nothing leaching out into the well system because it's encased and then it's taken and it's dealt with it. I just think that that's a very good way of doing it, and especially as we get more and more houses perhaps closer together in the housing development, that really makes more sense. And then, you know, they have to have a contract to have that pumped however many times a year based on the system. It's actually less expensive for them in the long run, and we know that it's being taken care of. I like that idea.
Okay, Supervisor Van Summeren, would you like to change that provision to allow for holding tanks across the county completely, and that as long as they meet code requirements.
I would, as long as they're going to make code
Okay.
requirements and we have a way of policing it. Right now, we really don't have a way of policing these things. But that way we would, because there'd have to be a sanitary pumping person that could send in reports.
Yep, and so currently, just so that the committee understands, when a pumper pumps any kind of private sewer system, they have basically 60 days to report back to us that that sewer was pumped. And they're able to go onto our online portal, file the report, and then we know that it's being maintained. And so that is something. The minimum capacity of 2,000 gallons here, that's a standard rule of thumb. We get a lot of people that'll generally put them in as 3,000 gallon tanks because that's about what the trucks can haul on the road. And generally the pumpers don't charge any more for 3,000 gallons versus 2,000 gallons. So generally that 2,000 gallon threshold is not a problem or not a big prohibiting factor in whether these are going to be done. So if we want, I mean, if you as a committee want, I can just tweak provision 4 there to allow holding tanks across the county.
Go ahead, Scott.
I like this idea, but my question is for you, is there anything, you know, does the state have reasoning that they have not necessarily left this, or is it just because it's something that the county has done that we haven't provided the ability for holding systems, or does the state have a discretionary reason that they have frowned on them, or I'm just trying to get some background for that decision.
It's a St. Croix County thing. Most counties allow holding tanks as a system of choice, and that it used to be, talking back in like the 80s when they were doing the old perk test, they'd dig a 5-gallon pail size hole, they'd wet it, you know, and that holding tanks are only allowed as a system of last resort, similar to what we've got here. The problem is that a lot of people were skewing the results of their test and saying, yep, and that's bad soils, it's only good for a holding tank, and essentially they were getting their holding tank installed anyway. And so that's where a lot of counties have went to just allowing them, making sure that they've got a maintenance contract, you know, and a maintenance agreement with them, so that they're able to get them pumped. The issue in that with these, or any sewer systems, in fact, is a lot of the municipal treatment plants don't accept the waste. But as these municipalities rebuild these facilities, you know, and I think they're going to be building it with growth. You know, the county has seen so much growth, and that some of our sewers, like in Roberts and stuff, are already at maximum capacity. So they might have to haul it a ways, is what I'm saying, and that to one of the munis around. So, but one thing about it too, if you allow holding tanks, just kind of the big scheme of things, is if we do conservation design developments and you're dropping the minimum lot size down, a holding tank only has to be 25 feet from a well, and it only has to be 2 feet from a lot line. So now you've really reduced your footprint where you're able to get a private sewer system on a smaller, you know, 1/4 acre, 1/2 acre buildable area of the lot, versus some of these mounds and that you still got to have your tank, and then the mound is much bigger. It's got to be at least 50 feet from the well and 5 feet from a lot line.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, I like this proposal as well. I'm wondering, what are the implications on staff if we make this change? Are there any?
No, and that, I mean,
Okay.
it's just, yeah.
That's easy.
It's easy to make this change, and that we would simply pretty much remove provision 1 there and just say that holding tanks must be at least 2,000 gallons, you know, and that otherwise they would be prohibited, you know, to enforce our minimum size tank. And so if there was the desire from the committee to make a motion to the full county board, that could be amended on the floor tonight.
Do you know how long a 2,000 or a 3,000 gallon tank lasts between pumpings on average?
Depends on who's using it. So, and that if you're, just
My
in
teenage son showers for an hour.
yeah. In my past experience, and that if you're a family of four, you know, and you got kids and that are taking showers and you're washing more clothes, and that could be every 6 weeks, 8 weeks. If you're an elderly couple, you know, and that you don't have kids at home, you might be able to stretch in that 2.5 months, 3 months, and that per pump. And so it really depends. That's all improving nowadays though too with low water consumption toilets and faucets, you know, and that. So overall water volume is getting smaller. So
At 300 to 400 for a pumping, I've bought a lot of houses over the years, but I would never buy a house that had a holding tank. Because that ongoing cost can really add up.
a lot of times too with a holding tank, they make what they call 2-compartment tanks nowadays. And so for a beginning house buyer could potentially put in a holding tank, 2-compartment, and let's say they want a 4-bedroom house, and that normally that would require a 1,250 gallon septic tank, and then they would have a 750 gallon pump tank and that in there. So they would still meet that 2,000 gallons, and then down the road they could put in the mound if the pumping of the sewer got to be so expensive that they wanted to. So that's always an option too.
Go ahead.
I just think with our water quality that we're concerned about in the county, and again, on our comprehensive, on our the plan that we looked at before, been working on, good water is really a priority for most people, and this is a way of ensuring that more so than another sewer system that's not working. You know, and they all have, these tanks have alarms on so they can give you a heads up as to when it's going to need it. Our church happens to have that because they're right next to a creek, and I think they pump it. School meets there now, and that's increased, I think, maybe 4 times a year. I think they made, I think we had to put in 2,000-3,000 gallon tanks based on how many people are there for an hour 1 day a week, which was kind of overkill, but now it kind of works out okay. So I just think it's a win-win. At least make an option for those who want to make that option.
Supervisor Van Summeren brought up water quality, and Administrator Witt and the county board approved some extra funding in that for our land and water department in 2024 here. So they just are getting that process kicked off. It's really aimed to take and see what the impact of private sewers are on water quality. So it's a big monitoring and testing effort that our land and water folks are doing. And they're going to be also sampling for PFAS as part of that, and a whole bunch of like personal hygiene products or big scientific names, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce them. And then also like caffeine. So it'll be interesting to take and see what those results are, and we should have them towards the end of the summer. And those are also sampling housing developments that are older and then housing developments that are newer to try to create a trend to see is the water quality that being downgraded as these developments are getting older? And then how does that compare to ag? So.
Okay, I think chapter 13 was part of the same public hearing.
We should close the public hearing on 12 and then we'll open the public hearing.
Or reopen it for
Yep.
13, yeah, okay. So, does anyone from the public want to comment on chapter 12?
Okay, so we had one comment here or question is how do you know that it's going to a municipal plant versus on a farmer's field? And generally holding tank waste and that goes to the municipal plants and that unless they've been approved for a land spreading site. So there could be some exemptions, but generally speaking, holding tank waste is different than the 3-year waste because it's got actually a lot more water in it and stuff. I don't know. It's something I've never been able to explain, but. you would think that there would be a lot more concentrations of any contaminants and stuff in the waste after it's in a sewer tank for 3 years than in a holding tank for 3 months, you know, but it's just,
Yeah.
Do we have to have a second on, I made that motion, I don't think it was ever seconded, was it?
We
haven't
haven't
made a
even
motion.
gotten to business items, so you'll have to remake the motion. Yep. Any other public comment? No. All right, we will close the public hearing on 12 and 13 for now. We will go to business item number 4. And first, before we hear any amendments, we will need a motion.
Which is the motion I made already, correct? Oh,
No,
oh,
we weren't there yet, so if you made it, it'll have to be made again.
I move to approve the proposed St. Croix County Chapter 12 sanitary ordinance as proposed by staff.
Do I have a second? Okay, second. Jerry, thank you. Any discussion?
okay, so now I'd like to, do I have to make a motion to amend that?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to amend the ordinance, the sanitary ordinance, to include the option of tanks for sanitary, for sewage, in addition to the mound and to the conventional sewer system.
I'd second that.
Do we have, I guess, more precise language, Jason? Do you want to take a shot at that and see if that's what Supervisor Van Summer's trying to get at?
I think number 1 would just change and say that, what's components are? Holding tanks less than 2,000 gallons would be all number 1 would say, because that would be what would be prohibited. So then we don't have to talk about high-strength waste, we don't have to talk about accessory buildings, we don't have to talk about gray water, we don't even have to talk about new dwelling construction. It's just any holding tank less than 2,000 gallons would be prohibited.
All right, any discussion on the amendment? No discussion on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment to change number 1 to read holding tanks less than 2,000 gallons?
Aye.
I,
The director even switch mics with me. Must be on a timer or something. All right, so I'm in favor too. Any opposed to the amendment? Say aye. All right. That amendment passes unanimously. Okay. Now back to the original ordinance. Do we have any discussion on the ordinance as amended? All right, with no discussion on the ordinance as amended, all those in favor of the amended ordinance signify by saying aye.
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 just clarity, that's for chapter 12 only, right?
Yes, for chapter 12, yep.
Okay. Aye.
And aye. All those opposed to the approval ordinance to repeal and recreate chapter 12 signify by saying aye. All right, that passes unanimously also. All right, now back to the public hearing on Chapter 13, Land Division Ordinance Amendments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This ordinance is Chapter 13, which is the Land Division Ordinance for St. Croix County. The county's Land Division Ordinance hasn't been amended in its entirety, and that for many years. There was several policy changes in this ordinance, but overall, the intent was to streamline the land division process as far as time frame from when preliminary plat or preliminary CSM is completed through the final approval process, as well as trying to simplify the text by removing any duplicate text from the document. And that significantly reduced the overall length of the document. It's down to about 46 pages now from around 100 pages. So with that, the Office of Corporation Counsel has reviewed the ordinance petition that was filed with the county clerk and has no further comments. We incorporated a lot of the citation formatting that Corp Counsel included, and we published a proper Class 2 notice prior to this hearing. And with that, Supervisor Counter had mentioned that we did send out an email on March 22nd to the St. Croix Valley Home Builders Association and Gene with the Western Wisconsin Realtors Association, and then about 40 different surveyors, engineers, and stuff that we currently work with frequently in the Community Development Department. As far as this ordinance, it was kind of a rough draft, so we did make some grammar changes, like I said, with Corp Counsel, and there really wasn't any policy changes from what we went over with you in March. I presented these changes in a PowerPoint to the Wisconsin Towns Association meeting about a month ago, and we had no bad feedback from any of the town members on any of these amendments as well, which I think is important. Today at 10:15 this morning, we received some comments, and that from Doug Zoller. He is one of our surveyors in the area, and he had several different questions or comments, but he had 7 different policy changes that staff, or not policy changes, but ordinance text changes that he would like. And I can go through them really quick. I got the page numbers for each change. Okay, Mr. Zoller had a question about number 14 here. So we're underneath the preliminary plat section, and right now it takes and says that all wetland depictions shall be conducted by a professional wetland delineator and reviewed by the land use administrator or WDNR, so the Wisconsin DNR. And that provisions, and that could be, wetland depictions may be required to be conducted by a professional wetland delineator and reviewed by the land use administrator or WDNR based on filling and grading activity. Because his point is, do we really need to take and have all the wetlands delineated if we're not going anywhere near the wetlands? So that was his suggestion. I don't know if the committee is okay with that one. Okay. Okay, and then we're underneath the conservation design development, and we had already made a change to this provision, but he suggested removing B1A3, and that was a written description of the existing wildlife habitat. He said he thought that was very similar to number 2, because the vegetation on the site, whether it's prairie or forest, will probably give us an idea of what kind of wildlife are in that area, just being that we don't have that much difference in our county as a whole. Whereas if we're talking East Coast, West Coast, then it might be relevant, you know, but when it's all within 30 miles of each other and it's upland woods or it's a wetland, you know, we probably have the same kind of ducks and species there present. So I don't know if your thoughts are on that, but are we okay with that? Okay. I appreciate Mr. Zoll's time going through the ordinance and reviewing it, because our eyes kind of started going in circles when we were going through this text so many times, so. So on page 112 here, he's wondering if our Register of Deeds office is still microfilming. And I said, probably not. So anyway, so photocopying and that, yes. So as long as they're able to be copied, that might be a good change. So just to update it with the 20th century. On page 114, now we're talking about minor subdivisions and the certified survey map, or the CSM. And he's saying that provision G could be struck, because if somebody has a survey done, generally the surveyors are the ones filing that with the deeds office. And so do you really need to have something that's saying that it has to be done within 6 months of approval? It's probably going to be done because they're just paying for that survey up front anyway. Probably a good catch. It's probably a provision that we'll never have to use anyway, so.
So what's that one?
And that, so let's say that you got a CSM approved today, that you'd have to file the CSM, and that within 6 months, and that, or 24 months of the first approval, which would be the preliminary approval, which generally a minor CSM like this is only a 30-day review, you know. So now you have those CSMs hanging out there, and, you know, they're not being filed with the deeds office in time, and that, and so that provision, if they file it right away, keeps our GIS mapping updated on a more timely basis as well, versus having stuff hanging out there for a long period of time, so.
So what if you have a CSM approved, but you don't file it for 5 years or 10 years? Can you come in and then file it?
And that, well, if we remove that provision, yeah, you could.
I had an issue like that back in the 90s. Something had hung out for years, and they go, well, here's the approvals for it. And it's like, that was like 20 years ago. They go, well, it was approved, we just never recorded it.
Okay.
It became a huge issue.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's why maybe having a requirement that you have to file it, so it has an expiration date. If you don't file it within a certain period of time after it's been approved, your approval went away and you have to repeat the process.
Kind of like a statute of limitations on your,
Yeah.
And we do want to get these things in, because then that's improving our GIS mapping, you know, that, because it's tied back to the corner. So I'm totally fine with leaving it in too, so, yep. Okay, so we'll leave that one. Okay, 116. B. Oh, so this is one that's kind of a missed one. So big change in this ordinance was, oh, yep, Supervisor Rice,
Could you provide us with the page number?
116. Okay, and what I'm looking at is 3B, and it says subdivision roads shall provide connection to existing or planned road extensions and adjacent unplatted property. That's kind of a demand in that they have to connect the roads from one development to the other. And Doug brought that up, as that might be an overreach of the county, because we've got down in provision C that proposed roads shall be at least platted to the exterior boundary of the plat so that the connection can be made. But because of the Rock County court case versus the town of Beloit, is that the county can no longer require specific road specifications as far as like the width of the asphalt or the thickness of the pavement, that kind of stuff, because those are considered a public improvement. And the public improvements are really administered and enforced by the towns or the municipalities. And so that provision in B, maybe the town doesn't want that road to connect, and now we're requiring it to be connected. So that might be a provision that would be better enforced in that at the town level. But any provisions in there that are for setting up the planned and orderly development, to make sure that the road is platted to the exterior edge of the subdivision, that's something that we can do because that's more of a land use subdivision regulation. It's not a specification or a requirement, so, yeah. Supervisor Van Summeren.
I certainly think there ought to be something in there, because if Ryan builds a subdivision here and puts a road here, and I build a subdivision here, and they both come to a dead end, that's not prudent. So there has to be something that says, if you're building next to someone else, they have to connect. And that's kind of what this says, so I don't know if I would take that up.
Okay.
So maybe we could add, as required by the local municipality.
That's a
Because
possibility.
what he's saying is the case law says that we can't require it anymore. It has to be the locality. But maybe if we just add that language then.
I think that's wise, but it should be in there so that people don't not.
Yeah, I think that's good, so, yeah, and that's something that our staff are gonna be watching a lot closer, just to make sure that we're platting these things to the end, and that if there is an opportunity to avoid cul-de-sacs, and that might be nice in the future.
Could
All
we,
right.
should we put something in there for platted road extensions? Rather than, I know we can't specify the connection, but we could require the forward thinking of where the road's eventually gonna go.
It's kind of in C, well, let me see, I should be able to zoom it in. Sorry, should have did that before. So C says proposed roads shall extend to the boundary lines of the lot, parcel, or site being subdivided or developed unless prevented by topography or other physical conditions, or unless such extension is not necessary or desirable for the coordination of the layout of the land division for the advantageous development of adjacent lands. We should add adjacent lands.
So what does that mean? Does that answer Supervisor Shirley's question?
I think it does, yeah. Okay, I got two more, so not too much. So we're going to page 119 of the packet. I lost my page number. Okay, so on page 119, right above the table, some confusing language. So it says lot area for improvements and lot width as measured from the building setback line. So we'd like to keep that, and maybe add a comma there, but strike through the depth of the lot. We'd like to strike those 6 words. And that, so it'd be lot area for improvements and lot width as measured from the building setback line shall conform to the requirements of St. Croix County's land use regulations, but shall not be less than the following table. And so we're just not sure what through the lot depth is. So if you're on a cul-de-sac and your minimum width is 50 feet, most of them are going to go, so we're not really sure what that means. And that must be relating to a pie-shaped piece. But what happens if it narrows down in a spot because of a pond or a road, so anyway. What we're mainly concerned about is the width of the lot at the building setback line to make sure that we're able to meet setbacks and stuff, so if it's 50 feet off the right of way, it's 50 feet off the right of way, type of deal. That would be where we would measure. Any problems with that change? Now we're going to page 123. This is the last change. And it's an interesting change as well. This would be policy, of course. So supplemental lot standards, it says, in the case of a commercial or industrial subdivision, the contiguous buildable area shall be 1 acre. And staff have run into this as an issue in the past because in a normal housing development, residential use, the contiguous buildable area is a 1/2 acre. And we actually allow some smaller lot sizes for our commercial lots, but yet then we've got more contiguous buildable area. And so Zoller pointed that out. And so as staff, we would say that, yes, this should probably be the same. It should probably be a 1/2 acre. Just to match the smaller lot sizes that are allowed in the commercial. And you think about your smaller lots, you know, almost in town or a hamlet area, you know, so it would be a better fit. And that was the last of the public comments that we had received from Mr. Zoller. Well, like I said, all the other parties in that provided that we provided notice to have not provided any other feedback to it. So I guess it's up to you whether or not you feel like you're able to pass this on to the county board or what you want to do. So.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, also I'd like to draw your attention to page 128, number 6. That's got to be an error that just has to be cleared up. Wait till you get there. See that darkened area that says 13.7K and error.
Oh. Yeah.
We don't have to.
good.
We don't have to mark
Reference source.
errors. We just have to take that out of there.
Yeah, followed by reference source not found.
Right. Yeah. Error and reference source not found. So that would kind of show the world we haven't done everything right.
Good catch. Unfortunately, this is a document that a lot of staff had input on. And I don't mean that to be unfortunate, but I made the unfortunate decision that we would do it in teams and that. And so the formatting of the whole document got really wonky. And so now we're using the shared directory just with a clean version and a track change version so that it doesn't get all unformatted. So, but Corey and our survey staff over at Highway have also went through this ordinance and reviewed it, provided comment and changes. So all of our staff are on board with the changes.
Go ahead, Scott.
I got a few questions, I guess. One, as part of this, I know you talked also, I believe, about not having a fee in the fee schedule anymore or doing anything for the concept plats.
Correct. So we still have a preliminary plat review fee, but we did away with the concept reviews just because that was like a preliminary review to a preliminary review. Just because it had a lot of staff demands on it too, as far as timing, like writing up a report and stuff. And if they're going to the towns first, our goal was to simplify this ordinance so that the surveyors or the developers knew exactly what the county was going to require. And then they could start those conversations with the towns and that about the roads and what they were going to require. But then when the document gets to a closer preliminary stage, we'll definitely do courtesy reviews. It's just not a concept review, you know. So I mean, if they want our input about anything, we can definitely still provide that. Just don't need to charge them a fee, and we don't need to take and have all of the extra hoops to jump through. So
The concern with that was that I think it's a good idea, but the issue may be for liability reasons. If you're not, if you're doing it and you're doing it under a concept review, you're taking the time to ensure that, okay, this is a great idea, And then you start looking through all the ordinances and the drafts and the things that people have to deal with, and you talk, if you see a flag, you're gonna talk to the highway department, whatever, but you talk to the different departments to ensure that when you're giving them the details of the concept, that they know what they have to work on or what they have to work with. And the concern then would be that if somebody comes in and they just have some basic questions and they're talking concept, and you aren't thorough about, well, but did you understand this or did you know that, which you're kind of doing more in your original concept review. If those things aren't brought up forward, and then they come in later, after spending a lot of money on it, and then we find, oh, geez, we can't do this because of these other reasons. Well, those weren't in your original questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know, and I just like to call it a courtesy review, I guess, you know, and that rather than the concept review. It's still always good to take and contact the county about anything, you know, as far as permitting related before you go ahead and do it. So, yeah, I mean, and our staff are more than willing to do that. The implication that it causes for staff too is a lot of times the way the current ordinance is that they write up this memo, you know, addressing everything. Well, then the plans change and then the town has input and it's like, really, was it really worth it? You know, and now that added another month or two to the process, you know, so it just really extends everything out. So.
The one of them that you had too, just a question on packet page 117 under C1D. We noticed that I think for qualifications that you were requesting for a, and I'm trying to do it from memory because I just took one note, but I think it was that you had to have a state approved plans or the zoning staff could make the call. And again, the only concern if you're requiring a statutory license or something for somebody to make a decision, and then you're saying, well, the zoning staff can do it. If the zoning staff doesn't necessarily have the same qualifications, again, it's about liability. Will that hurt you if somebody says something and then it doesn't pan out with what a statutory requirement might be?
Yeah, and that's actually, I think I got the right provision highlighted there, and that where it says that you got to be done by a surveyor or engineered, practiced in Wisconsin or zoning staff. Isn't that correct? That's actually a provision that's coming up quite a bit, and yeah, I'm totally on board. I think in that there's ethics in that with having a licensed profession, whether or not you're a surveyor or engineer. But that hasn't really been past practice in that. Staff have always wanted to have the ability to, you know, go out there and evaluate it themselves in case somebody's not being ethical. So that's where we actually did change that provision. We removed a bunch of other text in that was even more for staff, and we just left it open-ended with zoning staff. But if you're wanting to strike that, I mean, it should be fine in that because it's a professional that's doing it, so.
I don't have a problem with them doing a review of it for that sake that you just mentioned. I think that's a good policy, but just being cautious that they aren't making a call on something that would be a licensure thing that could get them in trouble.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why we put or zoning staff there too is, and that so that our staff have the authority to go out and make a determination on site too, and that to allow some kind of land disturbance, filling and grading to happen without having to have a surveyor come out and determine the slope, you know, and that. So it was to try to help people out too. So it's kind of a two-way street, so.
Next one was on 121, page 121 of the packet, and had to do with the buffers. And my question for you on that one is, you know, when we're talking about, I understand the need for the buffers and what we're trying to do with buffers. But with commercial properties, there's a give and take on some of that where you want to ensure that you're not infringing on neighbors and having lighting issues and all of the things that go with that. But on the other side, you kind of have to look at the plan of it so that you're not disallowing any access for visual for a commercial site where they're trying to pull commercial traffic that's going by that they can see their facility or at least see their signage and things. So how it's written, it seemed like it was restrictive, and maybe I'm missing something out of it that it is allowing for that. But I'm just trying to be careful that we're looking at that from the aspect of that commercial person too, that they need some visual, but yet also being respectful of all the neighbors, that they're not getting light pollution or noise and all of those things that you're trying to do with this ordinance in that section.
I will tell you in that this is a very robust landscaping and buffer section of a subdivision ordinance, you know, and that a lot of times these requirements are tied to a particular use through like a conditional use permit when they come in and apply, you know, and that, or maybe a non-metallic mining site, you know, we would have a berm and we would have some trees, you know, and that for it. So this is a pretty aggressive chunk of it, but we have simplified it quite a bit. And it wasn't really an issue for staff in the past. And that we have received some comments from a few towns about not having enough buffers or landscaping. And I think where the ordinance does a pretty nice job is that it is buffering from, you know, the roads and buffering from, you know, housing developments that are adjoining a commercial property. So that is some good things to it. I mean, some of it, you know, being 80% opaque, you know, is quite a bit. But I think there's usually flexibility with the layout of these buffers and that to allow for signage and some curb appeal, if you will, of the business. So, but I'm more than happy to make changes. I'm not trying to say that we're not going to make changes. So, but we did try to simplify it significantly because this is one of the things I'm like, wow, that's a lot. So.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily, I'm just looking at it that you can ensure that you have some flexibility where you can make sure you're looking out for the rights of the neighboring properties and all that stuff is how this is set up, which is great, but also that we, also somebody that's investing heavily to put up a big commercial property and is willing to ensure that they're limiting the amount of light pollution, but yet they still can have a visual of their facility to draw the traffic in that they're looking for. You know, as long as you have some authority over that and how you address that as people are doing it, that's what I'm more so looking for.
Yeah. Provision E there at the bottom of the page might help with that, giving our land use administrator some alternative landscape treatments and that to buffer or screen, you know, equal or greater requirements. So maybe that's building in some flexibility there. I'm not sure. That was in there before, so. Supervisor Shirley.
Under, I think it's 1A, the buffer of at least 10 feet on the right-of-way. In a commercial setting, that seems a bit on the harsher side.
So if they had like arborvitae or something like that, it might only be 5 feet is kind of.
Well, I guess requiring that buffer on the right-of-way side is where you're going to get the pushback, I would think. So that's, I don't know how you want to write that, because these are standards for all land divisions, so, you know, you're not going to have this issue with most of our land divisions other than the commercial side.
So are you proposing just striking that because we still have buffers and stuff? I mean, is it just an extra requirement that it's at least 10 feet, that you just open it up and let them determine what kind of a screening or buffer they would have? I think provision B is good just because you don't want to take and block any viewing triangle, you know, in that of a driveway or a road intersection, you know, so.
These are also rural commercial, not, you
Right.
know, city commercial districts.
I guess to me, if we're requiring a buffer and you were talking a commercial property, it would be more the adjacent properties, not a buffer between the road and the property. But I don't know if you want to take that out completely, because that may be a different kind of requirement on a residential property at the same time, so.
I think some of the thought behind that was there might be residential neighbors across the street. But that's something worth
We
considering.
do have that covered though then, because that would be generally zoned R1 or R2 across the street, so then we would automatically have a buffer that would be in place.
Oh, sure. So
So-
if it's another commercial, who cares
Yeah.
if there's a buffer kind of thing?
Right?
Yeah.
So if you had commercial and commercial on both sides of the street,
Yeah.
this would require them both to have a buffer, you know, and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
that's not the
I
priority.
mean, we can probably strike that one. Any other opinions on this bullet point? You're okay with striking? Okay. Yeah, you can continue. Yep.
Sorry, I had a big list. On page 122, you had a section in there that my question for you there is, it doesn't seem as though there's any limits of how much land could be dedicated to the public by the administrator. And I think back in the day, it used to be years ago that statutory, as you would either have a development fee for parks or you dedicated up to 10% of the land. But in this particular language, there's no discretion as far as how much land could the administrator, is it 50%? You know, obviously it's not 50%, but I'm just saying there's nothing identifying or giving you any reference to what those requirements may be.
Yep. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any requirements in the statute. Provision D is one that we had to add that is directly out of 236-16-3A. But I mean, if the committee wanted to set a threshold and that to make it very clear for staff, yeah. And that, because that's always going to be a line that if we ever get questioned on it, it's going to be hard for staff to say, yeah, that's enough. No, that's not enough, you know, so there is a gray area there. And that was in the existing ordinance. That's nothing that we put in. So, yep. So whatever your thoughts are.
Well, I don't know what the current statute, and when I'm referencing this was probably more than 10 years ago. So things change. So I just don't know if it's the same, but I think at that time it was 10%. But that doesn't mean that's where we have to go with this or anything, but maybe finding that reference and just ensuring first what that might be, if any, if it still exists. Because yes, if it were something, and there may be instances where it's all spoil lands anyway, and maybe they deem that this would be in the best interests of the public, that land is dedicated out of a development, say it's a particular kind of wildlife area or whatever, but the question is, statutorily, how much, is there any state statute that regulates you can't take more than this much, or how that's set up, and just to make sure that we're covered in that area.
Okay. I think, just going off of my head right now, I think it's very similar to what it is. I don't think there's any maximums and that for it, but I believe that there's also still payment in lieu of dedication of the land, and that, so I believe that's how it's worded, that you can dedicate or you can take and do payment in lieu still, so, but yeah, and that A, B, and C are pretty gray, so.
Then on page 123, one of the questions I have with that is, some parts of the county have soil structures that are high clay contents and things where there isn't an issue with particular kinds of commercial development as much, because it can be, you have almost like its own containment per se, but you go to other parts of the county and it's extremely sandy gravel. And my question for you with this, is there any thought to that with dealing with potential for pollutants, groundwater contamination, things that can be set off by certain types of industry, that we should be thinking about wellhead protection areas, and some of the communities are thinking about those, and a lot of them aren't, or haven't. I don't believe that they have really great plans yet in place for where their growth potential would be for these communities, and looking for future areas that they need to consider for protection. So the question on this is, is there any thought on those types of situations?
Yeah, we've got our stormwater provisions, and that would deal with, runoff from the site. And of course, there's going to be soil evaluations done, and that determining the size of those basins. We've now, and that with the new amendment to Chapter 12, kind of dealt with the sanitary side of it. So I guess we don't have anything directly in this section in that, but we could put something there if you'd like. So, but those are the two things that we've kind of got covered, I guess.
Yeah, the only ones I could think of is if, say, somebody decided to set up a new oil refinery in an area that could be pretty toxic if you had an issue, or a new plastics facility that, a 3M issue with the PFAS, or what, things like this, that I'm just trying to put some forethought, because we have to think out a long ways as we're doing this, and just protect our resources as we're going. We don't want to shut people down, but on the other side, we also want to make sure that we're thinking things through for that.
Probably the better tool for that is actually underneath our zoning ordinance and that, because those high-risk uses, I'll say, or the high commercial uses are going to require a conditional use permit, and so then we could maybe even establish monitoring wells if there was issues, or we could have some soil profiles done to see how far down it is to bedrock, and that. So that might be the better avenue in that, to make sure that that stuff is enforced versus the land division process. So
I'm just gonna interrupt to see if any other committee members had comments on Scott's thoughts or similar sections while we're here and it's fresh. Because
My only thought is just to echo your concerns. The people in my district are very concerned about groundwater quality, both the drinking water as well as, from a conservation standpoint, our natural resources. I mean, we have some impaired waterways that are kind of the lifeblood of commerce in the area, and they want to make sure we're not, first do no harm, and then protect what we have, and then beyond that, address problems we have. So whether that's a new ordinance or a separate zoning issue, I'm very supportive of that idea.
And I think Supervisor Counter was talking about future well locations, high-capacity wells, correct? Not necessarily existing ones. Any existing ones would have a wellhead protection zone already established around them. But Scott was trying to think the next step, where would the next well be? And how would this impact that?
I myself wanted to comment on the 122, the required land allowed. I would like to see more conservative limits set. So even if statute says 50%, I wouldn't feel comfortable seeing 50% as our county imposed limit, if that makes sense. Back to 122, where we're talking about the mandatory vegetation. Yes. Yep, buffer zones. Yep, thank you.
121.
121, sorry. You're going the wrong way.
Okay. Right here, and that shall achieve 80% opacity?
No, I think I'm talking about the yeah, I think Ken's right. Yep. The required parkways, I would like to be, yeah, I would like to see some type of conservative leaning limit on how high that number goes.
Yeah, I think the chairman's looking for, if we can find something in the statutes that sets a limit on the land use administrator.
Okay.
If we can't find a current state limitation, do you want us to create one?
Yeah, even if the state
Not more than 100%?
I mean, even if the state one recommends 50, I would not want to see that high. You know, like I don't think I'd go any higher than 20, and even that's pushing it for me. Just my opinion. Any other thoughts on that one?
So at the city level, what we did for a city subdivision is we had a park impact fee. So every lot would have a fee. So we established a fee per lot. And then the developer could donate a parcel that was equivalent in value to that or pay the fee. So those were the options involved. So, I mean, this isn't really structured to set up that way, but from a city perspective, that's how we had used to do it.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess to go back to piggyback on that, you know, if we can find anything in the statute, but I think I'd like to see an upper limit, you know, up to a certain amount.
Yeah,
listed
so
on there.
if we were right here, if you can see my cursor, and that subdivision to have up to 20% parks or whatever, you know, something, whatever that percentage is, that's up to you guys, but.
Even if the state, like I said, says more than 20, I wouldn't feel comfortable myself with it being higher than 20.
Okay.
Unless we have to, like unless the state says we can't restrict it further, but I don't. Typically, that isn't the case.
Do you want to put in your limitation now, subject to whatever the state limit might be?
Yeah, I would suggest a limit of 20, subject to whatever the state says. Yeah. Okay.
I'm pretty confident that that's okay, so.
That's yeah.
Well, it's 10 in the parks with that, that other statute, yeah.
Would you rather it be 10?
Well, we're saying up to, so
Sure.
that's fine.
Okay. Next one, Mr. Counter.
Are they still required to do a building pad, buildable building pad
And that,
on when they do the plat?
in the whole ordinance, and that, is that what you're saying?
as, is that in this section of the ordinance?
Not in this exact section and that, but they would have a potential building area on any lot that would be 5 acres or less in size and/or in a major plat requirement. So that was one of the policy changes, is that we won't require a soil test on lots bigger than 5 acres outside of a plat, because somebody might buy it just for hunting land or farming or whatever. And so what we had people doing is, back when the soil tests were cheaper at $300 to $500, people were like, okay, it's just the cost of doing the plat, you know. But now they're getting $600-700, and people are like, I'm just going to farm that field my whole life, you know. And that I don't want to spend $700 if I'm never going to use that soil test. And so then they're terming them as outlots. And then we're getting people that, you know, do buy a chunk, and then they end up coming in, resurveying and everything just because of that soil test provision, and probably not being taxed the same as if it was actual buildable lot, you know, when it might be. It's just that it didn't have a soil test.
Yeah. Well, the questions I have on it for, you know, it's, when they do these major subdivisions, more so than a minor lot and things, but it's identifying obviously where the driveways come in, where the building pad is on the site, because you get some of these subdivisions, it's pretty amazing how they can get as many lots out of them they do when there is potholed and you know, closed depressions and water, and I can recall some that had closed depressions with that were actually ponds that were within 50 feet of a building pad, and the building pad sat at a 15-foot elevation below the high water mark of the pond. So when you go to dig the basement, you can pretty much guarantee that there's going to potential for having a built-in swimming pool draining the pond that's only 50 feet away. So it's just how we're addressing some of these things to ensure that we think those things through too, as the reviews are being done, and how we can address those kinds of concerns. So in that case, that map should have probably been identified that, you know, no, you're going to have to be slab on grade. You're not going to have a basement on that particular build pad.
So we did keep the lowest building opening, the LBO, in there. So
seen that, yeah.
That is important, and then the high water mark in that as well, or the high water elevation in that too, because it's all being surveyed at the time, and now the surveyors are authorized under the statute to set the ordinary high water mark. So it's just boom elevations. You know, it's pretty easy for them. So
it's just, we're trying to protect people from doing not smart things.
Yep.
So the other one was on I think that was on page 134, but the financial assurance. And just the question on that is, the financial assurance, is, I kind of read that was just for storm and best management practice, or was that financial assurance also going into the full development cost with all the infrastructure?
Since we don't regulate the roads anymore, and that it's only for stormwater and the BMP is in that to make sure that site is stabilized. So, yep. So.
Okay.
Yep. And I will point out that 120%, that is the maximum, but we did try to take and clarify that we would not hold those funds any longer than when the site was established. So.
Yeah, I think I read something that it was up to 1 year from when
Yep.
When everything's established, and that you recognize that it's in good shape and there's not going to be a problem.
Yep. Correct. To try to speed that up in the past, and that they've been held longer than that, and really, in that there was a bunch of discretion for staff to hold those. And basically, the way we looked at it is if the site is stabilized with the permanent vegetation, that financial assurance should be released back. So, yep.
Okay.
Anyone else want to talk about any of the things we haven't that Scott covered? Anything for yourself? Go ahead, Ryan.
To continue on the financial insurance, I've always had a problem changing it to the 120%. It seems ridiculously high for me. I think that I get the reasoning behind it, but if we're holding that until vegetation, then I guess what are we holding it for? To actually do the work ourselves if they fail?
Correct. If the site is disturbed, they go in there, they create a bunch of, stormwater ponds and messes and that, and we have to go in and clean it up.
So not ourselves, but to hire a contractor to come in and do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess at the end of the day, is that our job to do?
Most ordinances would have those requirements in them, that maybe the 120% is high, but really they've got 2 years from when the plat is done, so we're trying to figure in a couple years of inflation, and we don't have any control over whose contractors they get estimates from. So if they're a developer and they've got some friends, and we're stuck with 2 of them that are kind of in the lower end of what it might actually cost, that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to build in some buffer for the county.
Yeah.
Just a point of view is that in the village of Alden, it's 125%.
Okay.
Well, and then the last part on that too is under financial assurance, we're holding the general contractor liable for those issues. What about in retrospective if it's something that the general contractor had no authority over, or you have somebody that comes in and is destructive, putting in some utility or something that has nothing to do with the general contractor's portion of the project, and they do a bunch of destruction? Is the general contractor then being held accountable for something from an outside source, or how is that type of thing handled?
It'd only be for the general contractor because it'd be the requirements on the development that were put into place. So it wouldn't be any utilities or a private lot owner. Let's say that the general contractor developer still owns 10 lots in a 20 lot housing development, and they get one lot owner that goes in there and totally disturbs it and does a bad job. And that we would go after that individual property owner, not the plat or not the original subdivider. So, yep.
So, I would say we would go after whoever provided the surety, because that's where the surety is, rather than trying to go after the person that damaged it. That developer, though, would have legal recourse against who did the damage. But the easier route is going to be to take the surety that's already been provided to us. I know what you're saying. We know who did it, but
Yeah. So
that's the hard money. The easy money is sitting on the table.
Any other comments? Otherwise, I have one more because we haven't been on this enough. Or the question on page 119, just a little ways up, there was something that in the draft got redlined out or deleted on requiring an on-site wastewater treatment system and its replacement. I'm wondering why that was. Oh, same reason, probably hunting land and stuff like that.
right.
Okay,
Yep.
that answers
Yep,
that.
I'm gonna get there, but yeah, so the idea in that was that before, every single parcel had to be soil tested in order to, right.
To be right there, right at the top there.
And
Yeah.
its placement, yeah. And that's exactly it, so that not every single parcel that is subdivided needs to have a private sewer system. If we got a parcel that's 100% swamp, and they want to subdivide it off and give it to Ducks Unlimited, you know, and that they don't have to try to find an acre of land to tie to it, and that has an area for a sewer, you know, so, yep. And it really, I don't think that we're, you know, not looking out for the public interest in that, because if it's all swamp, you know, that people should be going in and making sure that they're buying a property that is suitable for their needs, you know. No different than if it's zoned properly for what they want to do for it, so, yep.
All right, is there any other input questions from the committee? Anyone from the public want to comment on this zoning ordinance? No. All right, so we will close the public hearing. We'll move on to business item number 5. Ordinance to repeal and recreate Chapter 13 Land Division Ordinance. Do I have a motion? Yeah, I think, in my opinion, there's been a lot of discussion of changes from multiple people. I think we should, my opinion, leave this hearing open, send it out again with the changes that have been noted, and come back to this again, or table this until our meeting next month.
I would concur with that. I think there's been a lot of changes made that I'd like to see in print before we
Yep.
make that.
Would someone like to make that motion?
I will make a motion that we table this item until next month when we see the amended draft.
And I'll second that motion.
Any discussion on tabling this motion for seeing the amended draft? All those in favor of the tabling till our next meeting signify. All those in favor of tabling till the next meeting signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That carries unanimously. We'll see this again in June.
Just for clarification, Mr. Chair, can I just bring all of these changes back in a red line version of the current draft? So we'll have changes in that'll be on the clean version, so that you can see what the changes are from today's meeting and that at the June meeting. And is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. And then just going forward, we've got some other ordinances on the agenda. But is a clean version like this in the packet sufficient if I send out the petition with the red line and a clean version, and that as part of the petition like I did to all your emails? Is that okay? Otherwise, the packet will have a red line and a clean version, and it'll just make a really big packet. So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we will now move on to agenda item number 6, a resolution supporting the 2024 Wisconsin DNR Recreational Boating Facilities Program grant application for Pine Lake Boat Landing. Jason.
Okay, so basically this grant, we need an authorization from the county board to apply. It is due at the end of June, so we'd like to get this to the June county board meeting. This grant, we are targeting the recreational boating facilities grant through the DNR, and we have picked Pine Lake to apply for. The current boat ramp out there, there's concrete panels going into the water. There has been some heaving. There's about a 6-inch drop. So anybody that unhooks their boat when they're backing it into the water, could potentially send their boat on flying in that when they hit that bump. Any smaller vehicles pulling a bigger boat out of the water could have a hard time pulling it up over that lip. The dock out there has been repaired several times and is not ADA accessible. So you'll see coming in the future that we're trying to get all of our facilities up to ADA requirements, and whenever we can apply for a grant to help cover that cost, it'd be nice. The vault toilets, similar to what you guys seen at the Glen Hills campground, they were built in the 70s. They are not ADA accessible because of their turning radius. So we would look at putting in new vault toilets that would be unisex instead of male and female like we've got out there. And that would be probably a huff-cut concrete prefab building. And that is what we've looked at. That seems to be the most cost-affordable option. And the sidewalk is heaved and in poor condition, so we would make sure that that would be replaced and in ADA compliance. And then the pavilion roof has been on the things to do list for a long time. The roof actually sags. I'm sure some of the posts in that have settled over the years. And so we think that that would be a nice asset to improve in the park besides the paving of the parking lot. Just going through estimating the cost, we figured about $174,000 would be the grant. It's a 50-50 cost share. So that would mean that our portion as the county, and that would be $87,000. And we would use part of our normal park budget to cover those costs. So, or those funds, if we get awarded the grant. So there would be no coming back to the committee or the county board asking for extra funds. It would come out of our 2025 budget.
Go ahead.
I would make a motion to approve the resolution supporting the 2024 DNR Recreational Boating Facility Program grant application for Pine Lake.
And I would support it. It's very close to my area. Be nice.
You seconding the motion?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All right, seeing no discussion, we'll now take a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. I think he's going out.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 7, discussion of possible amendments to chapter 11.
Good evening. If I can get this thing to behave. There. Oh, right there. Okay. Right here. I think I got it. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through what Chapter 11 currently is all about. We wrote this ordinance in 2003. It was amended in 2012, and it has some need for some revision, and I'll point out those areas. Whoops. The purpose, boy, this thing is a sensitive son of a gun. I can't even look at it. I can't even touch it. It's just going all over the place. That's what I was trying to do.
Instead of trying to use this here.
Okay. Oh, that'll work. See, I don't get out here enough. I'm Tim Stieber, Land and Water Conservation Administrator. I haven't introduced myself to you folks before. So the purpose of this ordinance is to regulate animal waste storage facilities because there's great potential for them to be a pollution source in the county. And then within the ordinance itself, there's regulate the location, siting, design, inspection, and all of those things that go along with citing one of those. Currently, the applicability of the ordinance is the entire area of the county, the unincorporated area of the county. So anywhere outside of the other municipalities, we regulate these facilities. And currently, we only have 21 operations that have permits under that. We've issued many more permits than that, but we've issued multiple permits for single operations. For example, when they expand, we issue them another permit for that, or if they modify the facility later, a few years later. We go through the whole process for that. And then also we've put in quite a number of waste storages that the businesses are no longer around, and so they end up taking them out. So we don't get but 1 to 3 applications for waste management system modifications in a given year. So we aren't necessarily expanding our reach with this ordinance currently. When they get a permit, they have to get a nutrient management plan. By comparison, we have about 122 landowners that get nutrient management plans for the farmland preservation program. So there's a lot of need for the nutrient management plan work, but not that many as an outcome of the Chapter 11. We are authorized to have this ordinance by those statutes that are listed there. A large part of this ordinance is relying on other standards, and those standards are continually reviewed and updated over time by the other agencies. Those include the AdCap 51 that is has to deal with the local approval process for livestock facilities and what we can approve and what is out of our hands. And then also NR 151 provisions for facility placement, nutrient management provisions, what you can't do with manure, those sorts of things. And then all the design codes are largely USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service practices, and those are listed here as far as what standards they have to build by, what standards they have to manage their nutrients by. That's kind of a quick overview. Ooh, I shouldn't touch that. So I had suggested changes that I typed up. I only have a few. I would recommend expanding applicability to the entire unincorporated, to the incorporated areas of the county. While that doesn't seem like it would make a lot of sense, the rationale that I have listed is that we've had a number of manure byproduct processing facilities proposed inside of municipal areas, and therefore we were not involved in any of that process of review. And each of the cases generally turned into a large public battle, but there was really no knowledge of what would apply to those facilities. And the problem with building one of those facilities inside of a municipality is that there is no place to apply the byproducts that come out of the facility in those municipalities. It's all coming at rural farmland. So essentially we just sit there and watch the trucks roll by. So including the incorporated areas would kind of close that loophole. Another point is that in our list of other references, we do not reference NR 243, and that is basically a statute that details the requirements for CAFO operations, and it's very well written and has a lot of specifics in it. And the CAFOs that we have in the county already follow all of these standards. And the only reason to have it included in our list is that if this isn't in there and we do get a manure processing facility, they could fall back to a much lower standard of planning for the nutrients that would come out of a facility. Whereas there is almost no way that a manure processing facility could be constructed economically without using CAFO manure or large CAFO sources of manure, just due to the volume that's being proposed. And in the NR 243, there's very good references to the other standards as far as commingling of wastes and things of that nature, which become very important when you have a large processor like that set up in your area. For example, you can process 10% of non-manure materials into one of those right now by rule, and there's some pressure to change that percentage. And that's be a state level fight. But what that essentially would be is you would have turn that facility into a industrial processing plant. And so I've taken that into consideration with some of my other recommendations. One of the things that was kind of an error of omission, I believe, back in 2012 or the other times that we worked on this was we could have added USDA Practice Code 318 to the list, but we did not for some reason. And this code has a good straightforward list of setbacks for manure. If you were to take it out and stockpile it along roads, et cetera. And it sets a minimum stockpile period, et cetera. And those stockpile locations, we can require an applicant to locate them in their nutrient management plan. And without having this practice code in the addition or revision, a lot of that would be open to question. We wouldn't, we'd have a more difficult time. And nothing makes the phone ring more than about 5,000 piles of manure that suddenly appear on the landscape. Because I had about 1,000 of them where I used to work, and that made the phone ring pretty good. And then one of the things that I would like to include is to specify the use of SNAP Plus, which is a program that the state generated and is used, widely used by agronomists to prepare nutrient management plans. The reason why I'd like to specify that is that when I receive a nutrient management plan from an agronomist, if it is submitted to us electronically, it's very efficient for staff to review that. As a matter of fact, it's an excellent program once you learn how to use it, like most of them are, I suppose. And we can very quickly map it and look for things and determine if there's problems. Matter of fact, it even flags the problems for you. It's quite good. Right now, many agronomists do not give it to us in the database form, and it is a couple of hours of review. We can sometimes get it from them just by asking, but it's not required. And basically the state says we have the right to demand it, the electronic database from the agronomist, but then it becomes, now we're fighting with farmers for a database file. And so we generally just do the review with the PDF format. However, if you get into applications for really large facilities that might come our way in the future through a manure processing facility, for example, I can't imagine being able to make sense of that data when you'd have literally hundreds and hundreds of fields where this materials would be applied on, and we'd have to have it in a database format. So that would have to be an expectation. Oops. Lose my train of mind there. I'm way off track. Up? Okay. Okay. Only have a couple things. Another thing that I would like to work into a revised Chapter 11 would be something that is stated in NR 151, which we're supposed to follow, in which I feel has gotten lost in the weeds. Whenever we've had large applications that involve animal waste or digesters and these sorts of things, it becomes a very fuzzy argument that becomes political very quickly. And this particular section of NR 151 kind of states what is expected of the reviewer of the county, and that is that the applicant will maintain or reduce delivery of nutrients to impaired waters or exceptional resource waters which we have both in the county. We have the Kinney, the Apple, parts of the Willow are exceptional. Perch Lake is exceptional. We have St. Croix, Willow, Rush. Some of those are impaired. So we have plenty of those waters in the state, and the burden of proof has to be on the applicant to say that they're not going to have an impact on those areas. And so determining that is extremely difficult, and I had many meetings with DNR to try to figure out what model I could put in here to require an applicant to use, that the burden would not be on the county to try to figure it out, and then it would be one expert against another. Turns out that the SNAP Plus program did it again. Turns out that the SNAP Plus program is it's fairly simple, but it does do a pretty good job of modeling the losses if all the data is entered. And so it turns out that by requiring that to be a requirement for the applicant, we can also require data that will establish baseline, and we can use that to help manage an application. And none of this was very clear the last time we had to go through this process. And so that's what I was looking for, at least some way to manage a future application so it doesn't become, like I'm picking these things out of my hat. Excuse me. So in the process of doing the update, I would plan that there would not be any changes to construction standards that we have currently in place. I wish we had more animal waste storages being constructed in the county, but we do not. It's simply uneconomical to build them for small operations because it costs so much and the margins are so low in agriculture that it just is very difficult to do it for less than a large number of animals. I think the largest thing that would require some discussion from your group there to determine this incorporated areas, and if that would be probably the likeliest, most controversial change, an addition for an ordinance. And I had thrown in there a trigger of 1,000 tons. If you have that many tons on site, I think I did the calculations of how much that would be, but essentially if you have a large tank of manure, you have to follow the ordinance. Where is it going? Where's your nutrient management plan? Those kind of things. And then the last paragraph I have in there is basically a key part of weathering the storm of if we ever were to get a large processor of manure in our county, I believe one of the most important things to help manage that and not have an impact on our environment would be to do an accounting of all the materials that are going into the facility. If you just say, okay, we're going to permit the facility and then go our separate ways, anything can go into that facility, and that could have big impacts on our people and our farmland. And so having that's definitely not out of line, because in Chapter 11 now, if someone increases their herd or changes from chickens to cattle or from cattle to dairy, they have to report those things, and it's reflected in their nutrient management plan. But the Chapter 11 we currently have doesn't work for a manure processing facility because they don't have animals. All they have is trucks that come in. And so we have to have a way to account for how much tonnage is coming in. And I believe those changes that I've suggested would allow us to be able to show any applicant what would be expected, and then they can determine whether or not they can comply with it or not. So I hope I got your ideas going.
What comments do we have, Mr. Shirley?
In our now I'm forgetting what I was going to say. The plan that the farmers have to create, do we allow for farms that are next to each other to allow that plan to come together with, like, say 3 or 4, that they could have a storage facility shared?
I haven't done one, but I do believe that farmers do that already. They have to report, how much is coming in, and they have to be able to maintain 180-day storage for the waste that's produced. And those are one of the things that was quite apparent to me when I began to read 243 was that we are holding our farms to a much higher standard than we were ever considering holding a processor to, because we didn't know what that processor really was. We didn't know what to call it, and we didn't know what rules applied or what didn't apply, and we really never got those answers from our agency friends in a timely way. They left us hanging, and so I've been kind of researching that ongoing basis. And if we hold a processor of manure to the same standard as we do for a CAFO facility, I believe that would be a very difficult bar for a processor to meet, because they're going to have to find acreage for all of that product. They have to find a place to go with it. And that doesn't seem like, well, most CAFOs can find the farmland because they're out in the farmland. They get to talking to neighbors or whatever, and everybody wants some good manure for their farmland. But if you're bringing together a tremendous amount of manure, you can easily, now you need 80 or 90,000 acres, and it just becomes it would be very difficult to get that many acres planned in a year. Not impossible, and we'd have a mechanism for that to happen, as the CAFOs all do it,
My other question was, has Corporation Council commented on us including the incorporated areas in Chapter 11?
Who is that?
Has Corp Council?
Have not. We were just going to start in and see if that was even palatable from the committee, and then go back and present that.
Who makes the decision? Does the county actually make some of the decisions that you're talking about here, or is that state? And here's what I base that on. I understand that what we know as Emerald area, I think it's changed its name to something green. No, they have expanded or have applied to expand their herd. Therefore, their manure piles are going to grow stronger and higher. I understand the state okayed that and not the county. So with that in mind, is this the same thing? The state's going to overrule what we say, or how's that going to go?
No, the CUP, the conditional use permit that the Emerald Sky got back in the day was up to right where they nearly went to. That was on the books, and that doesn't leave. I mean, there was nothing they did to that to go away. What they got was they had to renew their WPDES permit, which is a state water quality permit. And because they expanded their herd, they had to re-up that. And that was a state process. And we put in comments, we thought, they should do a little more of this or a little less of that or whatever. And then they sold, so we're looking forward to work with the new owners on those kind of things. But so yeah, the state does have oversight on some of these areas, especially when you leave the 1,000 cow or 1,000 animal unit threshold. And but yeah, some of these areas, when I've been reviewing these nutrient management plans, and I've been calling the DNR fella on it, and he's like, you know, I don't think he's ever looked into these as much as we have, as far as that goes, because we're finding some things where we think there could be quite a bit of improvement if they would just take and use the tools that they already have and looked at the nutrient management plans that they're submitting, you know.
The other thing that you brought up, which is accurate, is there's not enough, the farms have not built enough storage space for overflow, so I know they're shifting it from one farm to the other, to the other, to the other. Mm-hmm. So that means that Farm B may have applied for so much manure, but now he's getting a large amount from Farm A, and you know, how does that fit in? And when it all runs down the river, who covers that? Who pays for it?
Well, there's no guarantee it's going to run down the river, but if it does, then they're in big trouble. But then we have a state, you know, that'll help us solve that problem. But basically, having that annual requirement, they have to report that manure, where that's going. So in the SNAP Plus, you can do like a manure audit of where it's going, so you can find out what fields it's going on, as long as they're accurate and honest with that. Some counties dig in on that area and start to do audits on individual farms. We have never done that, where you actually go out and measure what they're putting on fields and then just start tallying it up and seeing if it's accountable, you know. We have not done that, but there are counties that do.
I think the intention of this agenda item, and correct me if I'm wrong, was to kind of make sure if there's an appetite for even considering these changes.
Correct.
I think, my opinion, we should, I guess, give that indication, and then we can get into the details if and when we see a draft agenda. My polite suggestion is for 11 and 15. We once we have a draft agenda of 11, we can take 11 and the first half of 15 and have a work session, go through it all, ask all our questions, because 15's huge. Half of it's like 100 pages, right? And then do the same thing with the second half, 15, and then save our more specific questions for that work session. Okay.
Mr. Chair, yeah, if I can, it's kind of going to be a learning curve in that going through this, but there is 66,000 acres underneath a nutrient management plan in the county, which is excessively high. That's a lot more than most counties have. And rather than coming out and saying, yeah, the facility is approved or prohibited, maybe we need to figure out, do we got the land area to spread the nutrients on and make sure that we're applying it. So that shouldn't really be against the producer and that, or the facility operator and that, as long as we're applying the nutrients appropriately.
Yeah, I think, I mean, everyone's opinion, I think 11's worth looking at, right? So I think you should definitely continue to pursue some draft amendments and changes.
Right.
And we'll go from there. But yeah.
Can I just get one?
Yeah, go ahead, Scott, real quick.
Just one comment on it. If, as part of this, I don't know if this would be in the same category or not, but as we know, there's the issue over near Chippewa, one of the other counties over there, dealing with dead animals. And is that something that we would incorporate in with this particular thing and kind of combine them, or is that going to be?
I haven't figured out how to work that in.
Okay, well, I'd like to think about that, because
Okay.
we sure don't need that kind of situation in St. Croix.
I'll look into seeing if it fits in any of those statutes. It might have to be a standalone type of thing.
Then, all right, so that's agenda item 7. For 8, unless anyone's opposed, for chapter 15, 50 pages, there's a lot of information in there. I would propose we wait till there's a proposed amendment for half of chapter 15, and again, have that work session and just go through it all at that time and kind of table this until after that work session.
Yep, that's perfectly fine with staff, Mr. Chair, and that we just wanted to provide you with a draft of what we had worked on, and that so that the committee knew that we're trying to create a draft of the ordinance. Basically, right now, we're getting into the development standards of the ordinance, and then we'll keep on going through. There is going to be some sign amendments that we'll have to make do, and some landscaping and stuff, so we're working through all of that, and when we get roughly 100 pages done of the 200 pages, we can definitely set up a work group session.
Sounds
And
good.
we'll probably have chapter 11 done at the same time, so.
Yeah, we can just do it all in one bulk
Yep.
work session at that time. So then we'll move on to agenda item 9, discussion of phase 1 of the Eckert Blufflands Park development.
Okay, so I took an approach to the town of St. Joe about a month or month and a half ago about the access coming out the north end of the Eckert Blufflands Park here. And they were pretty receptive, but they wanted an MOU and stuff. And so we just looked at reevaluating this whole property because the property does have some challenges. And so at the March committee meeting, the committee asked staff to talk to the town of Hudson about coming in on the south access here and about creating the access more with a parking lot up along the field entrance. And so last Tuesday, the 7th, I was before the town of Hudson. The town of Hudson made a motion in support of the county using the south access here to access new Highway 35 of Old 35. One of the benefits of this and all of these projects going on at the same time is that our Highway 35 bike and ped trail for phase 1 will be coming up along the east side of new Highway 35. And so that trail is going to be coming up along here. And the plans right now have the crossing of Highway 35 on the north side here. And so those will have the pedestrian signs that'll flash. They've got the beacon lights that will go really fast. They're solar powered. And so up on the north end, we've had about 15 to 20 feet of fill that needed to be brought in order to take and fill. There's a big valley here where the old road is. So this is about 15 feet of fill to bring it up to the same elevation. And the DOT recommended a bypass lane and a turn lane here. And whereas if we go to the south access, Robbie with our highway department believes that a type C intersection is all that would be needed, which is basically just a bigger flared approach. And we would we would end up squaring up that access and that so that you don't have a blind spot as much, because right now it's kind of coming in at an angle. So that would be coming in more square here and then kind of a straight shot. We do have a fair amount of right-of-way left over from Old 35 in that area, so it is feasible to do it. Old 35 is currently a gravel road, but it is fairly wide. So we would end up paving that road up to the existing road that goes into the park, which is River Heights Trail. And that is going back to serve 7 houses back here on the back side of the park, which is another challenge because part of the master planning process, as I understand, is that there was a lot of opposition from those park users about having to go through the main park entrance every time and whether or not their family members and friends and stuff would be able to access the park without having to have a pass. And so this proposed layout seems to make sense. There's kind of a natural curve in the road right here. So if we built up this first segment of it, we could have some signage along here, park traffic must keep right, and that to split here, private drive signs coming down into here, and that for the existing road. By paving the southern portion of the road here and not the northern portion of Old 35, the thought process by that is we could have some signs along the exit of the park here saying, all park traffic must turn right, and if it's blacktop going to the right, most people are more likely to take and follow the blacktop road versus traveling on a gravel road. If this new road was paved coming in here, it would seem to make sense that we would have an on-road painted bike lane in that to make our trail complete going all the way to the park. It might actually be on the other side of the road. I apologize, the map isn't perfect in that because I threw it together in a day with Charles Green, our GIS technician. But then basically coming through and coming out to the parking lot someplace in the middle of the field, having a centrally located bathroom building between a playground area and a pavilion. Eventually, those would not be part of phase one. I'm just throwing some concepts out there. And I apologize in that this whole thing is getting a little bit more than what Chairman Anderson originally intended, because he just wanted some trails. After walking the site this last fall, there's kind of a natural break here. It must be an old fence row on that used to come all the way down through, but there's kind of a clearing here. So this would be kind of like a main primary trail corridor going up between the two pine plantations. This trail here on the north edge is pretty much all cleared right now. The portion from here towards the St. Croix is pretty level, and you're walking along a hardwood forest on your right and plantation plants on the left. It's kind of cool. And there's a lot of ravine on the right-hand side. Then when you get closer to the west, you're along the bluff of the St. Croix, probably for a couple 100 feet. Then you would go back to the east, have a trail going through the plantation pine for some diversity before you get into the open area, whether it's prairie or what kind of plantings, and going down. So that's kind of a thought process there. The original master plan had some trail development in that northern part up here. So that is very cost prohibitive though to do that. So maybe that would be a future trail. But the idea is that would be all in line, and that for our main trail corridor. That segment, because of its terrain and being fairly level, I think that would be feasible to be an ADA trail down the road. We would start out with it just being a class 5 gravel trail, but it could be paved and meet the ADA requirements without a lot of work. Going from our main trail connector here to the east, this has got some rolling hills. It'd probably be much harder to make it ADA accessible, but the thought is that you'd be, going by some open space here in the fields. The sports field, I didn't really mean it as a sports field. That's what I had originally wrote on there, but this is a nice level opening here that's kind of surrounded by the trees. It might be something nice for an amenity, maybe pickleball field, maybe a basketball hoop, maybe horseshoe pits, whatever it might be. And that it's just a nice area that wouldn't be very hard to develop because it's level. Then as we go closer to Old Highway 35, there's an oak ridge top here that the trail could follow pretty evenly. So I tried to take and lay out these trails without going through a lot of terrain. And it would basically come down here and hit Excel's power easement, and then curve back up through the softwood forest on the south end of our amenity here. And then there's about 10 feet of elevation change from that transmission line easement down to the parking lot. So there'd be some kind of a switchback curve coming down through the woods and that to provide some easy ingress, egress and that from that upper area. Supervisor or Chairman Anderson also talked about some swing bridges, and so this bottom loop could potentially be constructed as well. This is right along the bluffs of the St. Croix, and these are very big ravines that we would have to cross with these swing bridges, but another neat area. The original master plan had provision for a maintenance garage, and to take and do a maintenance garage, there's some openings here, kind of right behind the entrance building, which would probably make the most sense as far as utilities, or maybe on the north side here. But here would be, a roughly 10-acre chunk that could be developed for future mountain bike trails, or they had a high ropes course in the original master plan down the road. I'm not saying that we could get all these trails developed in the first phase. I'm just trying to throw it out there as a concept. Now that that access moves to the south end and our entrance building isn't in the middle here, it does open up another trail segment possibility. And the reason why this was moved into this area as part of the original master plan was to deal with a high volume of traffic on an event. And that's so that we didn't have traffic backing out onto Highway 35. So we had to have some storage capacity for cars as they're going through the park entrance. Going through the south end, and that we have a lot of storage capacity on Old 35 coming up into the park, and that could take and help buffer that. So that's why we're able to keep that entrance building closer to Old 35. As far as construction, Highway is still committed to helping the Community Development Department with building this. If the county board, wants to fund it in 2025 or beyond, there was originally in the master plan a sledding hill right in this corner, on the southeast corner of the property. That might end up being used for a borrow site and that for the building of the roads and stuff. It just might make sense because of its location and its proximity to be very close there. So in overall, I think this concept, addresses the Highway 35 bike and ped access to the park nicely, because now we only have one crossing point too, so we would have only the one crossing here. We wouldn't have a crossing here and up at the north end of the park. So we would be back down to that. One point, we address our traffic volumes and that with our storage capacity. We keep the private landowners to have their own separate access without having to go through the park gate, and maximize trail development for the time being. So. And just, that not being that it would be part of this phase, but something in my head too is like, okay, in the future, the county owns a pretty good sized chunk down here by the cabin yet, and what if we want to get down in there, because that's our best access to the water, so a trail could easily break off and go over there. If we decided to, maybe a potential road would Y here and come down and connect into the area, so then we would have like a double Y, so we could still keep the private access private, and we would have better access to the south end of the property down the road. So I don't think this kind of rough concept would limit that. One of the things that we want to do as staff, and that because I'm going to meet again with the town of St. Joe and the town of Hudson on Tuesday to talk about their zoning requirements and make sure that our plan kind of aligns with their requirements. But also to be good neighbors for the people that live back here along the St. Croix. Is the master plan originally had pine trees being planted along the edge here, and that to take and create that buffer for noise and sound and car lights and stuff coming into the park. And so if the county board was going to want to move forward with this, we would want to try to plant those trees in the fall here when we don't have to worry about watering them quite as much, to create that buffer space, to get kind of a jump start at being a good neighbor out there.
Dollar-wise, we'd originally, we came up with the initial concept for this and said if we're going to build it all at once, it was over $17 million. And the county board seemed to have a problem with that. So this plan, and you're going to see the whole KIP project list next month at your meeting, but this plan now is reworked to, we're going to take it little by little. Little by little is $2 million in the first year to get the road in and get it started, and then $1 million per year to continue just to expand the park and develop it as we go, but breaking it into much smaller pieces rather than trying to do it all as one project. Per your suggestion.
Yeah. So the first year would be like getting the entrance, parking lot, and maybe one of the smaller loops done or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first year, yeah, right. The buildings here, not part of the first phase, those would give us grant opportunities to seek funding for. And that unfortunately, I don't know of any grants that we can do, to get the trail and that, or the road built up coming into here. That's where if highway's willing to do the work and do the design work out on 35 as far as that access, that's gonna save us a lot of money. And then coming in and just, as long as you got the heavy earth moving equipment there, build your parking lot, build your main infrastructure that you're gonna need for many years, and then figure it out, after that. But more than likely, we would probably go after this main westerly loop trail here on that to start. And if Supervisor or Chairman Anderson would like to take and try to do this here, that might be something too. This trail coming out this way, that might be something that would be easier to build with like the Wisconsin Conservation Corps or something like that to get going. So, but you got to have an access into the park, and we got to have parking, in order to really start promoting it. So.
I appreciate the new layout because that really answered a lot of my questions. I love the entrance in there, and that separates out the private drive. That was exactly what I was looking for before. But my question is, the road coming off from the south into where the entrance building is marked, or future entrance building, what, do we know what just that portion, is that $1.5 million, $1 million? Somewhere in that ballpark?
Well, we built a couple entrance stations. How much are they costing you?
Well, so we just got the one for Glen Hills. The estimate there for the entrance building was 700,000. So, yep.
I guess my question is, if we want to bite off part of this, we to run through all of this and run the parking lot all the way up there for $2 million, are we going to get that through? Could we go a smaller version of that and get us up to the entrance station, and maybe from that pink entrance area, connect it, you could call it a temporary, into the white, diagonally up into that white, and just have that as phase one? That may drop our cost enough that we might.
So you're talking about coming up here, kind of like this?
Yeah, just to connect to that white trail there, and not build a big parking lot to start, and not bring it all the way in there. Does that save us enough that, we could be in the 1 to 1.5 range?
I think my understanding of what's been said today is that that right side is kind of going to be a later plan because of the terrain, and you'd want something a little more accessible. But yeah, I think that was the intention there. Any other comments?
See if it'll stay on. This is a beautiful concept and a starting place. I recently drove that stretch, and people do drive really fast there. I don't even know what the speed limit is. I think it might be 55, but they drive like it's a freeway. And so I would just really want to make sure whatever design we come up with for the entrance and the exit, I think I might even mention this to you, Jason, that, I can envision that there'll be competition for whenever that parking lot is built, for people to be there during the 4th of July season, where they have the fireworks in Stillwater and Hudson and echoing back and forth. A lot of traffic coming through there. I've had 2 people express to me concerns about bike traffic combining with the car traffic. It's something to flag for now without a solution, but if we're successful in having a popular park, I think it's something we'll have to address as usage goes up.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about this south access is we get rid of one bike and ped crossing on Highway 35, as well. So, yep. So it was a rough concept design. So anyway, you'll have time to think about it. We'll have all of our KIP budget numbers for you for June, and so you can see if it's a priority or not. So.
All right. And now thank you, Jason. Now what we've all been waiting for, the financial report.
All right, Supervisor Rice mentioned it'd be a good spot for fireworks, but the Community Development Committee meeting was a fireworks show. This is the grand finale. This is what everyone's been waiting for. So this represents 4 months, so that's like 1/3 of the year. The information's in your packet. If you look at where we're at, a couple of things. One of the things we were watching last year was the Register of Deeds fees, because we ended up finishing lower than we had projected. We finished 2023 at $859,000 compared to $1,074,000 the year before. So we're at 317 through April, and this time last year we were at 252. I did talk to the Register of Deeds, and she says activity is picking up in her office. So it looks like hopefully maybe the worst is behind us and things are on the upswing. Recycling, not much there yet. Hazardous waste, we haven't gotten into. Parks, beginning of the park season, so there's not a whole lot to look at in the parks. Really, other than that, I guess if you had any questions about anything that you saw in the pack, I'd be happy to answer it, but there's nothing terribly exciting. Really, probably that Register of Deeds fee one was the biggest one I wanted to point out. That's it.
Any questions on the financial report for our administrator?
Just one thing.
Yeah,
I
go
think the
ahead.
administrator was right. A lot like fireworks, a lot of noise. Now we go home.
Community Development Department update. Have anything there?
Yeah, I've got one main thing. So the bike and pedestrian trail along Highway 35, our contractor and John Hilgers and myself had an open house where we took and sent a letter to every property owner along the trail. And that was Monday night. We had only 3 people show up for it. But the contractor, A1, is going to be starting to grub the trees and that next week. And so that is moving along. The trail has been staked in that. There's some white stakes out there, and that for the at least southern half of it. And then once the grubbing is complete, we're going to have a delay in the project because we got to wait for the utilities to move all of the wires. So St. Croix Electric, AT&T, and Baldwin Lightstream all have utilities there that will have to be moved. We'll work with those utilities to see when we can get them done in a timely fashion before we can take and start doing all the cutting and filling and that out there. So just in case any of you hear any concerns or questions about it, that's kind of the time frame. When is it going to start back up? AT&T and Baldwin Lightstream said at least about 30 days to move their fibers. There's like 6 fibers there, 2 coppers and 4 fiber cables. And then St. Croix Electric and that said it might be even longer than that, but we're going to try to work with them in that on seeing what they can do. So, yeah. So. So. It sounds like all the main feeders that feed the village of North Hudson and even city of Hudson and that come down along there. So it's big wires and they are currently overhead and they want to go underground with it. So maybe there's something that we can do sections of the trail or something while they're moving. So that's all I have.
All right. Any announcements and correspondence? No. All right. Requests for future agenda items. Go ahead, Scott.
3 of them. Yeah. One, I'm assuming that we had quite the collection on recycling because there were a lot of people that said they couldn't even get in, couldn't make it. That the lineups and stuff were pretty extensive. So I just think we should look at that for the future for if there's other means and just strike a conversation on it during a meeting. The next item is just to bring back up that we've been discussing in the past, and, but we haven't finalized anything for notification for a comprehensive rezoning. Just want to continue with that to see where we're at. And the third item that I'd like us to consider is a discussion on event camping ordinance. I see that as something that we really need to discuss. If you look at the statutory requirements for event camping, they're very vague from Wisconsin. They don't give a lot of detail. They don't have really any safety measures built into it at all when you look at it. So there's some things in there we'd like to discuss over that and see if that would be something we would want to consider. Most event camping happens in pretty much my district and District 1, between the Speedway will have, is a minimum of 500 to, and I don't know the maximum, but it's tremendous amount that are in there for event camping that'll come through. And they're doing an okay job, but there isn't any basis as to what the qualifications are for what is a good job, you know, and it's concerns over things like, and I'm getting into more than I probably should, I'm getting into the weeds, but it's safety things. When you have more than 10,000 people at an event for a race, and somebody calls in and says, hey, my husband's having a heart attack, where are you? You know, you have to have a way, a means to be able to identify places and things. And it's not just there, but then District 1 also, they have the big concerts that has similar things. So it's something I think for our county that it's pertinent and something that we need to think about. So that's what I have.
Go ahead, Chair.
You know, 3 months, 4 months ago, I mentioned discussing part of the zoning as far as events and number of days, and I haven't forgotten that yet. Now, we can probably work that in to our number 15 on our work time, but I'd like to still take care of that.
Correct. That would be part of chapter 15, and we can look at the camping section. That's about where we're at right now in 15 as we're starting to talk campgrounds and stuff. So, yep. So, and then I can follow up with an announcement on the free electronic recycling event. We did have 852 cars show up in 3.5 hours that we were there. They estimated collecting 110,000 pounds of electronics. Everything from the old TVs and that built into the box and that to new flat screens and all the computers and stuff that go along with it. We do have another event in September over at the Baldwin Highway Shop. That's maybe a better location, but there's not as much for population over there because there's the back road that services there, so that will have capacity. The vendor was a little overwhelmed. He supplied 19 staff for it, and we also supplied a bunch of staff. But overall, a truly successful event, and the big thing was it was free. So,
Under request for future agenda items, we'll have the routine KIP review. That'll be on your next month's agenda. That'll be on all the standing committees next month. The other thing, though, was one of the things that had been asked for by the prior committee was just a review of UW Extension's educators. And so I've asked her for that, and so that should be ready for the June meeting also. So that'll be on your agenda with approval by your chair.
I would also like to put on goals and objectives of the committee sometime in that, but I wasn't going to do it tonight because it looked like it was a long enough agenda. So.
Any other remedy when you sink our teeth into in a month? No? Okay. With that, our next meeting is Thursday, June 20th at 5 p.m. And with that, we are adjourned.